Hi there, I am Alex Bear and I am the National lgbtqia Manager for the Pagan Federation. I want to talk to you today about why we celebrate Pride and where Pride came from. So, a really important part of being a Druid, for me personally, is learning about the stories, the history, the lives of our ancestors and how they relate to our lives today. And I want to talk to you a little bit about Stonewall. So follow me, if you will. It's 1969, Manhattan, New York. LGBT people are illegal. It's outlawed to be gay. It is outlawed to be transgender. Now, a trans woman must, at every point of every day of her life, be wearing 2 items of men's clothing. Any 2 items, but 2 items, minimum. Should she be caught anywhere in a public place, or even not in a public place, with less than 2 items of men's clothing, she'll be arrested. Now that might not sound like such a terrible thing, but it's important to note that being arrested at that time didn't just mean sitting in a cell for a few hours. It didn't just mean perhaps having a criminal record. What being arrested in that time meant was potentially being raped, potentially being beaten, potentially having your livelihood taken away from you. Because at that time it was hard enough for an LGBT person to find work, to find a company or a manager who was willing to allow you to work for them. Because it was dangerous in those times. It wasn't just a slur you might get on the street. And I'm not saying that a slur is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that that's less than something else, because it can be. But a slur, the odd slur, doesn't mean immediate death. It doesn't mean that you're going to get hurt physically. But in that time, it wasn't slurs. It was physical abuse, constantly on the streets. And the LGBT community didn't have a voice back then. There was no platform, no public platform to be able to reach out to your community, to be able to stand and say, actually, I'm a gay man, or hey, I'm a trans woman, or hey, I'm queer. There was none of that. That just wasn't around. So, members of the LGBT community would meet in private. There were a few bars and a few pubs where people would meet in the upstairs rooms. They would have secret clubs and quiet areas, much like the pagan community had covens and graves, which were very private, and you didn't talk about them in public. You just didn't. But some members of the LGBT community would meet just to hang out. One of those places was the Stonewall Inn. It was a pub on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And people would meet there in the upstairs rooms, and they would just have a drink, meet their friends, meet their community. But the police were not happy about this situation. The police were quite openly and quite comfortably persecuting members of the LGBTQIA community. And it was well known, it was well documented, and it wasn't a secret oppression. It was public, very public. There was almost a pride in abusing members of the LGBT community. Quite regularly, the pubs, the private meeting places of members of the LGBT community would be raided. And during these raids, people would be arrested, They would go into jail, and while they were there, they would be abused. It was a scary time. It was a time when people didn't have an outlet. You couldn't be a publicly open member of the LGBT community. It just wasn't possible. And the community was angry, understandably so, but they couldn't lobby an MP. They couldn't write to the government and say, hey, I'd like a law against this. You just couldn't do it. Not only would it bring shame upon your family at that time, but it could end up in your death. People were literally being killed just for who they love or the clothes upon their skin. The community were angry, and on the night of the Stonewall riots, the police raided the Stonewall Inn. And as they did so, some members of the community, including Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, decided that they couldn't deal with this anymore. This wasn't an act of activism. This was a fight for the death. This was not just a community saying, hey, guys, I don't like it when you use that word, or hey, folks, could we maybe just not use the T-slur? This was a community saying, enough. You stop abusing our people. You stop killing our friends, our family. And on the night of the riots, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera and many other people whose names we'll never know got into trouble with the police. They started to fight back. They said, no, you will not harm our community. You will not hurt our people. During the course of the riot, bricks were thrown at the police. And on that night, the night that the world changed forever for LGBT people, our community put up a fight for our lives. And today, 50 years later, we sit here and I can publicly tell you I am a queer pansexual man and I am transitioning. Because on that night 50 years ago, someone dared to stand up and they dared to fight back and they dared to say enough. And today, 50 years later, all over the world, all over the country, all over the entire planet, people like me can stand up and we can say, I'm here. I exist. I love. And on that night, 50 years ago, Marsha, Sylvia, all of the others, they took a stand, not knowing, not even being able to consider that 50 years on we would be sitting here remembering them. And there's something to be said for that, because life can be really hard. And it's all too easy to say, do you know, I just haven't got the energy. I can't be bothered to fight. But every small, tiny act of defiance, every small act of standing and saying no, every tiny iota of energy that we expend towards activism, towards education, towards allowing people to get to know us, honours their memory. It honours the fight of those people who had no idea that 50 years later we would be sitting here remembering them, who had no idea that 50 years later it would even be possible in a world for you to be openly gay at work, for you to sit there and talk on social media. I know social media wasn't around then, but that's probably not a good example, but you know what I'm trying to say. They had no concept that today we might actually really be sitting here. The bricks that were thrown at the police were an act of hope. They were the desperate actions of a community who were dying for who they are. And while on the one hand I'm not condoning throwing bricks at the police, I'm not saying we should be taking violent action, though I will admit it has its place. What I am saying is that we can't just put down the torches that our ancestors lit and carried so proudly. Because to keep the laws in place which protect us and give us the right to have equality in the world, to be able to marry, to be able to work, to be able to say, actually, this is a discriminatory situation and I'm not happy about it. Those rights, those are things that we have to keep fighting for. Because although those torches have been lit, and although the world has changed drastically since Stonewall, there are still people out there who need us. There are still people out there who need to hear our stories, who need to hear our experiences, who need to be allowed to get to know us, to kill the stigmas that society has so deeply implanted about our differences being a negative thing. And today, which is the day before the festival, it's the 28th of June. It's the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. Today, 50 years ago, the world changed forever for lgbtqia people. Because today, 50 years ago, our community went from an oppressed, terrified, scared people to a people who dared to say no even. Sorry, my words came out wrong. 50 years ago today, a candle of hope was lit in the hearts of the LGBT community. And now, 50 years on, we host pride events. We collect in the streets. We hug our friends openly. We don't wear 2 items of the wrong gender's clothing. We don't have to. And it's really important that we remember where we came from. Because when we forget that, the minute we forget what pride is about, we don't just dishonour our ancestors, we dishonour ourselves, and we dishonour the experiences of our community. And so here we are, at our very own online Pride Festival. And I wonder, what would Marsha say if she could see us today? What would Sylvia think? I think they would be so proud of where we have come. I think they would be incredibly proud of the fact that their actions, those angry actions of a night without even thinking about what they were doing, because I'm sure they didn't. I'm pretty sure that they didn't sit there and think, wow, how can I get my name known worldwide? How can I grab this piece of fame? That wasn't even in their minds. What they were thinking was, oh my god, I can't take any more. And their actions were the actions of desperation, of fear, of life. They fought for our rights. They fought for our existence, as well as their own. So here we are, 50 years on, and the world has changed. We can love openly. We can work openly. And I know the world still has places where that oppression exists. The world is not perfect. We're not there yet. But we are so far from the world of Stonewall riots. But we also mustn't stray far from that concept, from that belief, from that power that they gave us. You know, we talk a lot about that as pagans, how ancestry is important, how where we've come from is important, and how we honour it is important. And I think that it's all too easy to get caught up in the rainbow flags and the drinking, partying. And while, yes, celebrating Pride is amazing, and yes, we need that. We need to be able to come together as a community and celebrate openly, deeply, with love. We also have to remember that it's a serious time too. It's a time when we look where we've come from and we look at where we could be going to. Still, world over, there are places and people who can't be openly out. And leaving the closet is a privilege. It's a great privilege. But it's one that can't be afforded to everyone, because there are still people who, for whatever reason, whether that's family disowning them, whether that's community, whether that's it not being safe to be out because where they live might be somewhere in the Bible Belt, for example, where it really isn't safe. The community there just isn't safe to be out. It's important that we remember that, and that we carry the torches that Marsha lit. We stand up and we say no. Because those of us who are able to be out, who are able to be publicly, loudly, proudly ourselves, we have a responsibility to the people who fought for our rights, who gave us the privileges we have. Because they didn't do that in vain. Their work got us here. And I ask you this: if we lift those torches proudly and we move forward fighting for our rights and fighting for the rights of our community who aren't always just on our doorstep but world over, where could we be in 50 years' time? If we remember the lessons of Stonewall and we remember the courage and the strength of those people who stood up that night, and yes, it was a desperate act, but it was so courageous. They knew what could have happened to them. They knew the consequences of their actions, and they chose to do it anyway. Me? I'm proud to be a part of this community. I am proud to know the story of Marsha, Sylvia, and all of our unnamed brothers and sisters and others who were there that night, who fought for the rights for me to be able to sit here and tell you this story. That is what Pride is about. That is what the Stonewall Riot was about. And I find it fascinating that in 50 years we could be here. Because today we can be arrested and know that probably the worst thing that could happen is a criminal record. Although in some places world over there are still situations where police brutality towards members of the lgbtqia community is prevalent. On the whole, it's not as bad as it was back then. It's not as widespread, it's not as public, I'm sorry, I'm struggling with words. It's not as, it's not a sport anymore. It was back then. It was quite an open sport. Now it at least has moved to a place where it is not okay. It is seen as not okay. It's, it's accepted that it is not an acceptable behaviour. Wow, I got myself into a sentence there, sorry. This is one of those subjects that I personally feel so passionate about, so inspired by, that I'm really struggling with words because I'm kind of like, this is mind-blowing to be sitting here talking about it. And it's incredible to think that the world that they lived in has changed so much to bring us here. So, my challenge to you, world, is this. Go out and do what you can. I'm not saying go out and throw bricks at the police. I'm not saying go out and cause a riot. I'm not saying do anything that is beyond your means or capabilities. But find something that you could do and do it. Doesn't have to be big. Could be as simple as using the correct pronouns for someone. Could be as simple as saying congratulations to someone on their wedding. It could be that you write to your MP, you lobby them for rights, for revision of the GRA, for intersex rights to not be operated on at birth. Sorry, my brain just went. It could be that you support Stonewall's work or the work of another major organisation. Whatever it is that you are able to do it. And do it knowing that the world has changed a great deal from when Marshall was here. But there is still a long way to go. And together, if we come together as a community, we can make those changes possible. But only if we raise the torches of our ancestors, and we raise them with pride, with love, and with determination and courage. So go out there and do it. Happy Pride.